I came across a news link in MSM, and I'll put a link to this. I'm going to read out the first few paragraphs and then go from there. A village in New Zealand has banned a replica of Captain Cook's ship from docking there to mark 250 years since the explorer's arrival after an outcry from the local Maori community. The vessel is part of a flotilla circumnavigating New Zealand next month for the Tour 250. Apologies in advance if I'm mispronouncing anything here. A New Zealand $13.5 million series of events that acknowledges the first onshore encounters between Maori and Pakeha, I assume that's the local word for the white man, in 1769 to 1770. It was due to visit Mangunu in the North Island, and again, apologies if I'm mispronouncing anything, but the stop was cancelled by the Ministry of Culture and Heritage after complaints from Indigenous figures. Amahera Herbert Graves, the head of Northland's Ngati Kahuiwi or tribe, told RNZ he was a barbarian. This is referring to Captain Cook. Wherever he went, like most people of the time of imperial expansion, there were murders, there were abductions, there were rapes, and just a lot of bad outcomes for the indigenous people. He didn't discover anything down here, and we objected to a 250 using euphemisms like encounters and meetings to disguise what were actually invasions. Um, so this is something that is you see in many parts of the world where there was European colonization. There's similar sort of protests in Australia and, of course, in the United States and Canada. Um, so here's my take. James Cook was a man of his times, and I've no doubt that he had flaws. I've no doubt that with colonial expansionism came murder and subjugation. Um, I've never had a problem with people acknowledging that. But this is what I take issue with, and it can be summed up in one word: hypocrisy. If we have a look at New Zealand's history, there was an important event called the Musket Wars, and I'm not going to get into an in depth analysis here, but basically, these were intertribal wars fought in New Zealand between 1807 and 1845, primarily intertribal wars between indigenous peoples. Now, during that conflict, there was an incident in 1835 when two Maori groups, um, and let me just get this up. This is from the Wikipedia article. In 1835, Ngati Mutanga, Ngati Tama, and Ngati Toa warriors hijacked a ship to take them to the Chatham Islands, where they slaughtered about 10% of the Moriori people and enslaved the survivors before sparking war among themselves. The Moriori people were pacifists who were descended from an older group of Maoris. This was on the Chatham Islands. These people were subjugated. They were brutally murdered by Maori tribes. So we're hearing about how awful Cook was, but where is the introspection? And I'm aware this isn't every Maori tribe, but they were Maoris. This was Maori people brutally slaughtering another tribal group. And likewise in North America, anyone that honestly believes that pre-Columbian America was just a big utopia of harmonious people living side by side is being incredibly gullible. Um, this to me is part of the kind of woke revisionism, but it's also frankly dishonesty among ancestors of indigenous peoples in these in places like New Zealand. I've no problem with them saying that Cook had this dark side, he subjugated people or whatever. Fine, talk about that. But if you're going to do it, then acknowledge your own history. And I don't see, much of that going on. These are just the facts I'm talking about. I'm not talking about um, something I brought out of thin air. This is historical records, historical facts that happened during the Musket Wars in New Zealand. I mean, the Maoris are a warrior people. So, are we really to believe that before James Cook arrived, there was absolutely no violence? There was no intertribal warfare. This is after he arrived, but are we really to believe? I mean, New Zealand is one of the last major islands on Earth to have been inhabited around the early 14th century. So we're talking a few hundred years before Cook arrived. Okay, not thousands of years, a few hundred years. So I'd just like to see a little bit more honesty. And if people are going to protest this, then they should be prepared to also look in the mirror and say, were we always peaceful? Can we always claim moral high ground? Like I say, it's the same with some of the Native American groups. There is historical evidence of tribes and bands and nations that entirely disappeared in the Northeast because they were subjugated by other tribes. And there's examples out west where there was outright subjugation by one tribe over another. So I'd just like to see a bit more honesty instead of the easy narrative, oh, the evil white man is responsible for everything. Let's just have a bit more honesty.